Principles, the bedrock upon which civilizations rise and crumble, the silent architecture beneath every meaningful life. Have you ever noticed how the most profound truths often hide in plain sight? The ancients knew this. From Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics to Marcus Aurelius's midnight journal entries, from Buddha's silent transmissions to the Tao's whispered paradoxes, they all understood that true wisdom isn't found in fleeting tactics or tricks or gimmicks or schemes, but in eternal principles. Yet our modern world seems to have forgotten. We chase technological shortcuts and viral life hacks. We subscribe to 7-day transformations and 10-step success formulas. The digital noise drowns out the signal of timeless wisdom that has guided humanity for millennia. What if I told you that beneath the dizzying complexity of existence lie simple, unbreakable principles? Not rules imposed from without, but truths that emerge from within once we have eyes to see them. Principles that, once recognized, reveal every dimension of human experience, from the heights of creative ecstasy to the depths of necessary suffering. Each principle we're about to explore existed long before you or I drew breath. Each has been recognized by every civilization worth remembering. Each has been forgotten and rediscovered countless times because truth doesn't require our belief to remain true. It simply awaits our awareness and integration. The Stoics understood this. So did the Taoists, the Vedantic sages, the desert mystics, the Renaissance polymaths, the quantum pioneers. Each articulated principles in their own language, through their own cultural lenses in their own times, yet pointed toward the same eternal patterns that govern reality. And today, we will explore some of the ideas that changed my life in ways I never expected. And if you wonder who I am Irrevelato. I reveal the secrets you deserve to know, the lives and stories of luminaries and gods, the hidden connections that bind the universe in a single fractal pattern, the transformative principles that can elevate an ordinary life into an extraordinary one. Today, we'll explore 12 principles so fundamental they appear in every wisdom tradition, yet so subtle they remain invisible to those unwilling to look beyond appearances. To my returning companions, thank you for your continued presence. Your willingness to engage with these explorations makes my work possible and meaningful, and I will never have enough words to express how wonderful you are. To those newly arrived, welcome to a space where wisdom is the fire that ignites enlightenment with the sole purpose of becoming the best versions of ourselves. But never forget that enlightenment is an active process. You need to get your hands dirty. These principles demand mind and matter, body and soul, intellect and commitment. They will challenge your assumptions, disrupt your comfortable patterns, and invite you into territories both terrifying and liberating, if you have the ears to hear them, the eyes to see them, the mind to understand them, and the heart to feel them. I don't create these videos to flatter your existing beliefs and comfort zones, but to crack them open, allowing fresh light to enter. I don't seek to convert you to any dogma, but to awaken the wisdom that already sleeps within you. I don't claim to possess the ultimate truth, only to be possessed by an obsessive thirst for it. This is who I am. If you find value in these revelations, consider supporting their continuation through the links in the description. But know that your most valuable contribution is your willingness to test these principles in the laboratory of your own life. What makes me happiest is when your life gets better after interacting with these videos, and when you understand that even if we don't know each other, I want you to be happy and wise, and I want you to be happy when you make other people happy and wise too. How wonderful would a world like that be? If you think it's pointless, think again. What if we each did our best today, inspired others tomorrow, and through this simple chain of wisdom and action, gradually transformed the world by awakening everyone to their inherent potential and divine nature? I don't know about you, but that's my type of world. So, let me present it to you. Let's begin our exploration of the principles that have guided the wisest among us since the dawn of consciousness. Principles that, once embodied, transform how we live and who we are. The vast human mind extends its reach toward everything. Yet wisdom begins when self and cosmos intersect. The dichotomy of control is an ancient Stoic principle that is the foundation on which our knowledge about tranquility was built. We mistake external circumstances for what belongs to us. We think stuff and other people are ours. We think we own things that are none of our business, and in this confusion, suffering takes root and flourishes. Epictetus, once a slave who found freedom through philosophy, declared, "Some things are within our power, while others are not. Within our power are opinion, motivation, desire, aversion, and in a word, whatever is of our own doing. Not within our power are our body, our property, reputation, office, and in a word, whatever is not of our own doing." The distinction Epictetus makes is so clear in theory, but so elusive in practice, yet it also creates the foundation for all philosophical progress. Consider how we chain ourselves to outcomes beyond our jurisdiction. The archer aims the arrow with perfect form, yet cannot govern the wind. The farmer plants with diligence, but cannot command the rain. The teacher offers wisdom, but cannot force understanding. We may offer all our love to someone, but they may love somebody else. You know how it goes. Our suffering arises not from circumstances themselves, but from the demand that reality conform to our will. A demand both futile and destructive, and oftentimes hilarious. The Stoics recognized three domains of experience: complete control, partial influence, and no influence whatsoever. Our judgments, intentions, and virtue remain entirely ours. External outcomes, partially influenced by our actions but never controlled by them, belong partly to us and partly to the universe. Then there are distant events, such as the movement of stars, the thoughts of strangers, the past, and so on. These remain entirely beyond our jurisdiction. Thus, freedom comes from recognizing these boundaries and distributing our energy accordingly. At the polar opposite, Marcus Aurelius, emperor of Rome yet student of wisdom, reminded himself, "Remember your retreat into this little domain which is yourself, and above all be not disturbed nor on the rack, but be free and look at things as a man, a human being, a citizen, a creature that must die. And among what is most ready to hand into which you will look, have these too. The one, that things do not take hold upon the mind, but stand without unmoved, and that disturbances come only from the judgment within. The second, that all that your eyes behold will change in a moment and be no more. And of how many things you have already witnessed the changes, think continually of that." The emperor truly has an eye for sensible thoughts. His message is not that we should diminish action and should live in our minds all the time, although that is a big risk after reading the meditation. Instead, being unmoved is a purification of attachment when it is too heavy a burden. We act with full commitment while releasing the outcome to the cosmos, or God's plan if you prefer, or your soul, or the muses. Like an artist who creates with passion yet holds the reception of their work lightly, we engage with life completely while always knowing where our authority ends. The tragedy of human suffering often stems from this single confusion, that we mistake what's external for what's internal. We believe our worth depends on circumstances, our peace on outcomes, and our value on the opinions of others. But these are false dependencies that create phantom chains. The moment we recognize what truly belongs to us, those chains dissolve. Seneca observed that the greatest obstacle to living is expectancy, which hangs upon tomorrow and loses today. Therefore, dear friend, when we focus on what we control, we reclaim the present, the only moment in which we can actually live. The liminal space between old and new that is continually advancing, probably in a fractal way, as well as everything else. What is certain is that yesterday exists only in memory, and tomorrow only in imagination. Our power resides in the eternal now, in the choices we make in this singular instant of existence. The practical application begins with a question: is this within my control? Ask this before investing emotional energy in any situation. Relationships transform when we recognize we cannot control others, only our responses to them. Work becomes less stressful when we focus on effort rather than outcome. Even tragedy becomes bearable when we understand that loss is inevitable in a universe of change. And the best way to move forward is to focus always on what you can actually control. Why bother with anything else? This principle advocates effective action. By concentrating our energy where it matters, which is on our judgments, choices and responses, we optimize both impact and serenity. We waste no energy on futile resistance against reality, which is what it is. As the serenity prayer encapsulates, we seek the wisdom to know the difference between what we can and cannot change. The boundary between self and world defines freedom. Yes. When we mistake external outcomes for personal territory, we become slaves to circumstance. When we recognize what truly belongs to us, which is often our perceptions and actions, thus our minds and their extensions, we discover an inner citadel that remains unconquerable, regardless of external events. This is the paradox and the lesson. By accepting the limits of our control, we expand our freedom immeasurably. So never forget that a man who doesn't depend on external circumstances to keep doing his best is living like a king. Duality permeates all existence. Light and shadow, creation and destruction, masculine and feminine, chaos and order, war and peace, love and hate, above and below. Unfortunately, the human impulse divides these pairs, embracing one while rejecting the other, the way Christianity did with the devil. But wisdom recognizes their inseparability. God cannot be separated from its nemesis. Every force contains its opposite. Every truth contains its antithesis, just as Christ has to become its antichrist. Integration transcends tolerance. It reveals the hidden unity underlying the apparent contradiction. Heraclitus, that obscure sage of ancient Greece, perceived that the path up and down are one and the same. A profound truth, Mr. Heraclitus. Opposites define each other. Darkness gives meaning to light. Silence gives context to sound. Death gives value to life. There is no doubt that the tension between opposites requires recognition and integration. Consider the Taoist symbol of yin and yang, black and white flowing into each other, each containing a seed of its opposite. This visual koan represents complementarity. The masculine isn't diminished by embracing feminine qualities, it becomes complete. Consider Jung's thoughts on the subject matter from his beautiful Red Book. What about masculinity? Do you know how much femininity man lacks for completeness? Do you know how much masculinity woman lacks for completeness? You seek the feminine in women and the masculine in men. And thus there are always only men and women. But where are people? You, man, should not seek the feminine in women, but seek and recognize it in yourself as you possess it from the beginning. It pleases you, however, to play at manliness, because it travels on a well-worn track. You, woman, should not seek the masculine in men, but assume the masculine in yourself, since you possess it from the beginning. But it amuses you and is easy to play at femininity. Consequently, man despises you because he despises his femininity. But humankind is masculine and feminine, not just man or woman. You can hardly say of your soul what sex it is, but if you pay close attention, you will see that the most masculine man has a feminine soul, and the most feminine woman has a masculine soul. The more manly you are, the more remote from you is what woman really is, since the feminine in yourself is alien and contemptuous. Dr. Carl Jung spoke the truth. Strength isn't weakened by vulnerability. It becomes authentic. Intelligence isn't compromised by emotion. It becomes wisdom. Carl Jung recognized this principle in the human psyche. The shadows, those aspects of ourselves we reject, don't disappear when denied, but grow stronger. Integration requires acknowledging the full spectrum of our nature. We contain multitudes, oceans and constellations and fractals, and everything are already within us and outside us. We are mirrors and mirrored in mirrorland. And we are capable of both creative and destructive impulses, selfishness and altruism, courage and fear, negative and positive. And psychological wholeness comes from embracing these contradictions rather than resolving them. So look for the relevant patterns and make peace with what is right for you to think and do after due consideration. Nietzsche spoke of Apollo and Dionysus, who are symbols of order and chaos, and reason and passion as complementary forces that, when integrated, produce the highest of achievements. Art emerges from this tension, as does meaningful living. Too much order leads to stagnation, too much chaos to dissolution. The tension and dance between them create the conditions for growth and creation. Eastern wisdom traditions formalize this mode of thinking and acting. Buddha taught the middle way between indulgence and asceticism. The Tao Te Ching describes how being and non-being create each other. We thus recognize a deeper pattern. Life emerges from the creative tension between opposing forces. Practically, this principle invites us to examine where we create false dichotomies. Are you valuing strength while rejecting vulnerability? Embracing logic while denying intuition? Pursuing success while fearing failure? Integration begins with recognition, seeing how these opposites actually define and strengthen each other rather than negate each other. The Western philosophical tradition, despite its love of categorization, contains wisdom about integration. Hegel's dialectic describes how thesis and antithesis combine to create synthesis, which is a higher truth that incorporates both original positions. The syzygy, the conjunction, the union, it is emergence, something new arising from the creative tension between opposites. Now consider how this applies to our experience of life. We seek pleasure, yet find meaning through challenge. We desire freedom, yet need constraints to flourish. We value independence, yet crave connection. These are the paradoxes we have to embody. The integrated life acknowledges these tensions without attempting to eliminate them. Spinoza perceived the universe as a single substance with infinite attributes, unity expressing itself through diversity, which I will elaborate on later. However, it is good to remember that this monistic view doesn't eliminate distinction, but recontextualizes it. The wave remains distinct from the ocean while being inseparable from it. And it makes more sense this way. The branch remains distinct from the tree while being continuous with it. Integration preserves uniqueness while revealing the underlying connection. Remember that the path of wisdom isn't found in resolving life's contradictions, but in transcending them through integration. There's nothing to argue about. There are only opportunities to be better or get where you want. It is necessary, in my humble opinion, to explore how our apparent opposites actually enhance and complete each other. The sage doesn't choose between opposing truths, but perceives the larger context that contains them both. But make sure you handle excess properly. Sweet desire, the perpetual reaching for what isn't present, the engine of human suffering and the ecstasy we will never truly get rid of. We live suspended between memory and anticipation, rarely inhabiting the moment where life actually unfolds. The paradox of acquisition reveals itself in experience. Each fulfilled desire spawns new longings. The horizon of satisfaction continually recedes before us, creating a journey without a destination. Epictetus observed, "Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants." And he's right. You don't have many needs, you don't have many problems. You can breathe and the chains are gone. The prison suddenly drops all of its walls. Abundance emerges from appreciation. The sage and the billionaire may possess the same objective wealth, measured by how much their resources exceed their desires. Think deeply about how desires multiply. The mind projects happiness onto future acquisitions. This relationship, this achievement, this possession, that person will finally bring fulfillment. Yet when obtained, the expected satisfaction proves fleeting. The hedonic treadmill accelerates, requiring ever greater stimulation to produce diminishing returns of pleasure. Nothing really stays the same. Nothing rests. Everything changes. Everything is dancing and vibrating. Seneca, advisor to emperors yet student of simplicity, wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, that is poor." The distinction between objective lack and subjective craving reveals how contentment remains independent of circumstances, as the wealthy person who constantly desires more experiences the same psychological poverty as the destitute person fixated on what they lack. Easy as that. The Stoics also practiced negative visualization, which means contemplating the loss of what they valued, not to induce anxiety but to build appreciation. The same way, memento mori is meant to remind you that your life needs to be lived your best way. Remember that when we look into the eyes of the impermanence of all possessions, relationships and circumstances, we cultivate gratitude for their temporary presence. Paradoxically, acknowledging that everything will eventually be lost deepens our capacity to value it now. Eastern traditions formalize this understanding. Buddha identified craving, tanha, as the root of suffering, and prescribed contentment, santutti, as its antidote. The Tao Te Ching declares, "He who knows he has enough is rich." Lao Tzu was right. Desire distorts perception, creating artificial scarcity in the midst of abundance. Thus, rather than seeking external acquisitions to fill an internal void that never really ends, we can pursue growth for its own sake. The artisan who loves their craft, the parent who delights in their child's development, and the thinker who enjoys a good exploration. All experience fulfillment regardless of external recognition or reward. Modern psychology confirms ancient wisdom. Research on happiness consistently shows that beyond meeting basic needs, increased wealth correlates weakly with subjective well-being. You can be broke and still be better off than some millionaires who have been enslaved by their wealth. The adaptation principle reveals how quickly we normalize new circumstances, whether positive or negative. The comparison effect demonstrates how social reference points, rather than absolute conditions, determine satisfaction. Marcus Aurelius, emperor of Rome yet master of contentment, reminded himself, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking." This is better than positive thinking because it recognizes that contentment emerges from aligning desires with reality rather than demanding reality conform to desires. Practically, contentment begins with awareness, noticing the gap between what is and what we think should be. It is this gap that creates suffering, not the circumstances themselves. But by questioning our demands upon reality, we discover how many are artificial, inherited, or ultimately unsatisfying even when fulfilled. Because most of our desires are like that. Most of our desires are not needs. Most of our desires don't serve our purposes. You don't have to eliminate all desire, of course, but it would help tremendously if you purify it, distinguishing between your true, authentic needs and conditioned wants. Wants and needs are very different. Contentment also doesn't mean stagnation. The content gardener continues planting, the content artist continues creating, the content scholar continues learning, and the content artist continues painting. Not from lack, but from abundance. Not from craving, but from expression. True contentment generates energy and creativity. And the ultimate contentment comes from acknowledging the completeness that exists prior to all acquisition and achievement. As Meister Eckhart expressed, if the only prayer you ever say is thank you, it will be enough. Gratitude transforms ordinary experience into revelation, revealing how much of what we seek we already possess. So be grateful. Have you ever observed how that incessant commentary inside your skull never really ceases to spiral? The inner narrator never shuts up, does it? Constantly labeling, judging, reminiscing, planning, worrying. The voice pretends to be you. It claims ownership of your identity. I am anxious. I am a failure. I am brilliant. The fatal error occurs when we believe that we are equivalent to the thoughts that arise in consciousness. But stand back a bit. Observe. Who is watching the thoughts? Who are you really? What are you really? The ancient meditation traditions discovered something profound about consciousness long before neuroscience caught up. The Buddhists have anatta, or non-self. The Hindus have sakshi, or witness consciousness. These traditions recognized that there exists a pure awareness distinct from the contents of consciousness. That something is ruling and encompassing everything. The Upanishads describe the Atman self as a witness consciousness that observes but remains distinct from mental phenomena. For example, in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, there's a teaching that says you cannot think of the thinker of thinking. The Upanishads refer to this observing consciousness as the witness self, or the seer, a consciousness that observes thoughts but is not identical to them. Focus a bit on this paradox. If you are your thoughts, who is aware of them? The awareness that perceives thinking must logically be distinct from the thinking itself. The eye cannot see itself. The knife cannot cut itself. Similarly, thought cannot observe itself. It requires a witnessing presence. It's an immediate experience. Right now, as your eyes move through these words, thoughts are arising. Perhaps you're agreeing, disagreeing, or connecting ideas to your experience. Notice that these thoughts appear in consciousness without your deliberate creation. They simply emerge, like clouds in the sky. And like clouds, they dissolve, making way for new formations and leave us in awe while we look at them. What a shame that man forgot to look at the sky. We've learned so much from it. You never chose to have that irritating song stuck in your head or that anxious thought about tomorrow, did you? I don't think so. Sam Harris, philosopher and neuroscientist, proposes a revolutionary experiment in a New York Times interview. If you look for the thinker of these thoughts, you will not find one. And the sense that you have, what the hell is Harris talking about? I'm the thinker, is just another thought arising in consciousness. What liberating implications! If you are not your thoughts, you're free from their tyranny. It means you are an autonomous being distinct from what's emanating the thoughts. The depressive spiral claiming I'm worthless is just a weather pattern passing through awareness. The anxious narrative insisting everything's going wrong is simply a temporary constellation of neural firing. Not reality, not you. And if you are something else. Spiritual enlightenment starts growing roots when you realize that you are not your thoughts. Yet our culture worships thought. We identify with our intellect, our opinions, our consciousness, our egos, and the stories we have in our heads. We say my thoughts the way we say my arms or my car, as if these are possessions that define us. But what if this fundamental assumption is backward? What if you are not the thinker, but the awareness in which thinking happens? What if you are an awareness? Ramana Maharshi, the sage of Arunachala, repeatedly directed seekers to a single inquiry. Who am I? When pursued to its depths, this investigation reveals that beneath all mental constructs, all identities, stories and beliefs, lies pure awareness, not a thing or an identity, but the open space in which all experience occurs. Practically, cognitive therapy uses this separation between self and thought through techniques like cognitive diffusion, which means learning to see thoughts as mental events rather than absolute truths. The instruction to label thoughts, I'm having the thought that I'm a failure, rather than I'm a failure, creates critical distance. Your thoughts are tools, not masters, models of reality, not reality itself, maps, not territories. When we forget this, suffering follows. When we remember, freedom awakens. Experience this right now. For 10 seconds, simply notice your thoughts without believing them, judging them, or following their storylines. Just watch them appear and disappear in awareness, like ripples on a lake. In that witnessing lies your true nature, not the ripples, but all the water. Not the content of consciousness, but consciousness itself. Not what you think, but what you are. So we have one cosmos with infinite expressions. This is unity and diversity at a quite incredible scale. The human mind discriminates, categorizes and separates. We draw boundaries between self and other, human and nature, body and mind, science and spirituality. These conceptual divisions serve practical purposes, but conceal the deeper truth that beneath apparent multiplicity and diversity exists a fundamental unity. The great traditions converge on this insight. The Vedantic principle, tat tivam asi, that thou art, recognizes the identity of individual consciousness with universal consciousness. The Hermetic axiom, as above so below, recognizes cosmic patterns replicating across scales. Indigenous wisdom sees the web of interdependence connecting all life. Even science, the bastion of empirical discrimination, reveals unity at its frontiers. Einstein showed that matter and energy are interconvertible. Quantum physics demonstrates that seemingly separate particles maintain instantaneous connections across space. Ecology reveals that no organism exists in isolation. Each participates in complex webs of relationships. Alan Watts, the poetic interpreter of Eastern thought, explained, You are an aperture through which the universe is looking at and exploring itself. Consider your own body. There lives a community of 30 trillion cells and equal numbers of microorganisms working in concert. Each cell contains complete genetic instructions for the entire organism, yet specializes in particular functions. Unity expressing through diversity. The blueprint of the whole is present in each part. The division between you and the world is less absolute than it appears. With every breath, you take in atoms that have cycled through countless other beings. The carbon in your cells once formed ancient stars. The water in your blood has flowed through oceans, clouds, rivers, and innumerable living forms. And the moon has moved it in a circular movement for God knows how much. You are not separate from nature. You are nature becoming aware of itself and observing itself and exploring itself and loving itself. Martin Luther King Jr. expressed this interconnection in ethical terms. In a real sense, all life is interrelated. All men are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. This principle recontextualizes the distinction. The notes in a symphony remain distinct while participating in harmonious unity. The organs in a body maintain unique functions while serving the whole. We have different species of life, but all of them interact with other species. You see, unity integrates. Look around you, make a habit. Every object, every person, every phenomenon arises from the same unity. The apparent boundaries between things exist primarily in conceptual overlay, not ultimate reality. The separate self that appears so solid is actually a process or a pattern of energy in constant exchange with its environment. As the Sufi mystic Rumi proclaimed, "You are not a drop in the ocean, you are the entire ocean in a drop." More importantly, when we recognize unity beneath diversity, compassion naturally emerges. The suffering of others becomes intelligible as our own, and environmental concern becomes self-interest rightly understood, and conflict transforms into creative tension within a larger whole. Race, nationality, religion, ideology. The social divisions that cause suffering are bound with meaning and history, yet they exist within a more fundamental unity. We can acknowledge differences while perceiving the common humanity that transcends them. The universe is not a collection of objects, but a communion of subjects. Not a machine of separate parts, but an organism of interdependent systems. Not a battlefield of competing interests, but a conversation of complementary voices. This principle invites us to seek connection across divides, to recognize ourselves in the stranger, to find the thread that links seemingly contradictory perspectives, to move beyond either or thinking into both and awareness. Unity doesn't mean uniformity. Diversity doesn't require division. Differentiation enhances rather than diminishes wholeness. The sage sees the many in the one and the one in the many, because all is one, and one is all. Oh yes, the Delphic oracle's timeless command. Gnothi seoton, know thyself. 2 words inscribed at the temple of Apollo, an invitation and a challenge, a journey inward, the oldest and newest frontier, simultaneously the most accessible and most elusive territory we can explore. But what does it mean to know oneself? The question unfolds like a fractal, revealing deeper layers with each iteration of inquiry. Are you your body, your thoughts, your emotions, your social roles, your past, your aspirations? Which of these constitutes the authentic self? Socrates built his entire philosophical method on this injunction, declaring that the unexamined life is not worth living. For him, self-knowledge was the foundation of virtue and the prerequisite for wisdom. He understood that unexamined assumptions distort perception through incompleteness. The person who hasn't questioned their beliefs and motives and lives under illusions and sees only their shadows on the wall. Carl Jung observed, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." A keen observation, Dr. Jung. Consider the unflattering truth that we often remain strangers to ourselves. We rationalize our behaviors after the fact. We project our disowned qualities onto others and think they are the problem when it is actually ourselves. We construct stories that preserve our self-image rather than reflect reality because we don't want to recognize that we can be assholes as well. Objective self-knowledge requires courage, the willingness to see what we'd prefer to ignore, the habit of saying "I am wrong" when you are wrong. The Indian philosopher Jiddu Krishnamurti suggested a radical approach. The highest form of human intelligence is to observe yourself without judgment. What might we discover through this observation? Perhaps that our personality, which we defend so vigorously, is largely an adaptive strategy formed in childhood, or a model of your mind or your soul. That our reactions often stem from past conditioning rather than present reality. That our most cherished opinions may be borrowed rather than earned through direct experience. Genuine self-knowledge transcends psychological archaeology. It's not just knowing about yourself, but knowing as yourself, directly experiencing your consciousness without conceptual mediation. The contemplative traditions distinguish between descriptive knowledge, studying the menu, and experiential knowledge, tasting the meal. As Ramana Maharshi persistently asked, "Who am I?" A good question. Who are you? This deceptively simple inquiry, pursued sincerely, peels away layers of identification until reaching the core of being, where you find the witness consciousness that observes yet transcends all changing phenomena. The Upanishads declare, "I am Atma Brahma," this self is Brahman. Thus, complete self-knowledge reveals personal identity and universal consciousness. The deepest self and ultimate reality converge. Yet self-knowledge operates practically as well as metaphysically. The person who knows their patterns can interrupt destructive habits. The person who recognizes their biases can make fairer judgments. The person who understands their strengths and limitations can engage life more effectively. Everything you know and have integrated ultimately prepares you for your potential extraordinary life. Greek mythology tells how Narcissus, captivated by his reflection, drowned trying to embrace it, as a cautionary tale that beautifully paints the difference between self-absorption and self-knowledge. The former fixates on image, the latter penetrates it. The former reinforces ego, the latter transcends it. Paradoxically, complete self-knowledge reveals that the separate self is partly illusory, a process rather than an entity, a verb rather than a noun. The boundaries we erect between me and not me exist primarily in thought, not experience. The self we seek to know is both more intimate and more expansive than we imagine. So, how do we cultivate self-knowledge? Through practices that enhance awareness. Meditation or observing the mind without identification. Self-inquiry or questioning assumptions about identity. Shadow work or integrating disowned aspects of personality. Authentic relationship or seeing ourselves reflected through others. Creative expression or externalizing inner content. Physical disciplines or discovering self through embodiment. The journey never ends because the self is definitely not static. We don't arrive at final self-knowledge but continuously deepen it. Each insight reveals new questions. Each answer opens new territories of exploration. You are a bridge and not a goal. As Nietzsche wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, to know thyself is to recognize both your uniqueness and your universality, your particularity and your participation in something greater, your limitations and your boundlessness. It is to become conscious of your own becoming. Never forget that you are always in control of your inner becoming. The mammoth task, the impossible challenge, the overwhelming situation. We freeze, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of what lies before us. The complexity seems impenetrable and the goal unreachable. The mountain looms too high and the path is too obscure. It is the moment of this ancient strategic principle, divide et impera, divide and conquer. First articulated by Philip II of Macedon, refined by Julius Caesar, and systematized by Machiavelli, this approach originally described political and military tactics for controlling territories and populations. Yet its relevance is felt beyond conquest. It is a fundamental method for managing complexity in any domain. The essence is elegant simplicity. What cannot be overcome as a whole can be mastered in parts. You can do anything if you simply do the steps step by step. The mathematician Descartes formalized this approach in his discourse on the method. Divide each difficulty into as many parts as is feasible and necessary to resolve it. Consider how this applies to intellectual challenges. The scholar doesn't attempt to comprehend an entire field simultaneously, but breaks it into manageable segments. The scientist doesn't start with universal questions directly, but isolates specific variables. The writer doesn't produce a book in one sitting, but develops it chapter by chapter, section by section, paragraph by paragraph, sentence by sentence, word by word. The programmer embodies this principle perfectly. Faced with creating complex software, they practice decomposition, which means that the programmer breaks the system into modules, functions, and subroutines. Each component, manageable in isolation, contributes to functionality that would be impossible to create monolithically. As Lao Tzu observed, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. What makes this principle so powerful is its recursive nature. Once a problem is divided, the resulting components can themselves be subdivided if necessary, creating a hierarchy of manageable challenges, each solvable at its scale. The martial artist understands this very intimately. To master a complex technique, they break it into constituent movements, practicing each separately before reintegrating them into a fluid sequence. The musician similarly decomposes difficult passages, slowing them down and practicing sections before attempting the complete piece. Psychologically, it works the same. Overwhelming emotions become manageable when we recognize their components. Anxiety might decompose into physical sensations, specific thoughts, and behavioral responses, each addressable individually. Seemingly insurmountable grief can be approached breath by breath, moment by moment. Even physical objects reveal their secrets through division. The anatomist understands the body by studying its systems separately. The chemist comprehends matter by isolating elements and compounds. The mechanic diagnoses the vehicle by examining components individually. Think about evolution, nature's grand problem-solving strategy. Complex organisms didn't appear fully formed but developed through countless incremental adaptations. Each genetic variation addressed a specific environmental challenge, gradually accumulating into complex biological systems with unrecognizable characteristics and functions. There's Zen wisdom here too. When hungry, eat. When tired, sleep. This is simply and profoundly a recognition that life happens step by step, never all at once. We can only live now in this moment, doing this action, through this breath. On the other hand, trying to solve all of life simultaneously creates paralysis, and you can apply it in daily life as well. The overwhelming project becomes doable when broken into stages. The chaotic home becomes orderly when organized one area at a time. The intimidating conversation becomes approachable when structured around specific points rather than sweeping issues. Yet division alone isn't enough. The conquer part matters equally. Each component must be decisively addressed, and the insights gained must be reintegrated into understanding the whole. Division without subsequent synthesis creates fragmentation rather than mastery. There's wisdom in knowing when to divide and when to unify. Some phenomena lose their essence when dissected, like explaining a joke or analyzing why music moves us. The most profound experiences often resist reduction to parts. The sage knows when analytical division serves understanding and when holistic perception reveals deeper truth. Remember, division is a method, not metaphysics. While we separate things conceptually for practical purposes, reality itself remains interconnected. The map divides territories with clear boundaries. The actual landscape flows continuously. So when facing the impossible challenge, divide until manageable. Conquer each part thoroughly. Reintegrate with wisdom. Repeat as necessary. What seems insurmountable whole becomes inevitable in pieces. Binary thinking is the great seduction of certainty that fails us every single time. Good and evil, success and failure, intelligence and stupidity, male and female, liberal and conservative, true and false. We love our categories precise, our boundaries fixed, our boxes clearly labeled. You are either with us or against us, they say. The binary offers comfort. a world cleanly divided with no messy middle ground, no uncomfortable ambiguities. But reality refuses such simplicities. Look closer at any apparent dichotomy and witness it dissolve into gradations. What seemed like distinct categories reveal themselves as a continuous variation. The convenient fiction of either-or transforms into the complex truth of more or less. Take, for instance, light, once thought to be particles or waves, now understood as both, neither, existing along a spectrum of possibilities, depending on how we observe it. Quantum physics replaced classical certainties with probability distributions and complementary properties. As Nietzsche warned, I mistrust all systematizers and avoid them. The will to a system is a lack of integrity. Our psychological traits exist on continuums. No one is purely extroverted or introverted, rational or emotional, creative or analytical. We express these qualities in varying degrees in different contexts. Even our most fundamental categories, such as male and female, reveal themselves as spectrums of biological, psychological, and social expressions, rather than absolute binaries. Moral questions similarly resist black and white resolution. Nobody is perfectly good. Nobody is free of sin. All of us are mixtures between an infinity of extremes. Between the saint and the villain is most of humanity. We are complex beings, capable of both compassion and cruelty, selflessness and selfishness, kindness and violence. Our noblest motives contain shadows, and our darkest impulses often spring from legitimate needs poorly met. Political ideologies, despite their presentation as distinct alternatives, actually represent constellations of values and priorities that overlap in complex ways. Those who identify strictly with a single position often sacrifice nuance for tribal belonging, missing how elements from various points of view might better address very hard problems. Even truth itself exists on a spectrum, from practical certainties to provisional models to speculative hypotheses. The philosopher Karl Popper recognized that scientific knowledge advances not through absolute verification, but through degrees of corroboration, as theories proven are useful until better explanations arise. What practical wisdom emerges from this principle? First, intellectual humility. When we recognize that our understanding exists on a spectrum rather than in absolute certainties, we remain open to new information. The phrase, "I could be wrong," is now a strength and an acknowledgement of the complexity beyond our current perception, and we might even be too limited to observe it all. Second, compassion for difference. When we perceive human variation as natural diversity, rather than deviation from a single norm, we approach others with curiosity rather than judgment. The autistic mind, the highly sensitive temperament, and the unconventional thinker represent valid expressions along the human spectrums. Third, creative problem solving. When we move beyond either or thinking into both and possibilities, new solutions emerge. Political problems often require elements from multiple ideological approaches. Personal growth involves integrating apparently contradictory qualities. Innovation frequently combines previously separate domains. As the poet Walt Whitman once said, "Do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. I am large, I contain multitudes." We fear the spectrum because it challenges our desire for certainty. Absolute categories provide the illusion of comprehension and control. Yet that illusion comes at a tremendous cost. Oversimplification that distorts reality, polarization that creates unnecessary conflict, and rigidity that prevents adaptation. Health also manifests in degrees of function across multiple systems. Happiness fluctuates through varying intensities and qualities. Trust develops through graduated experiences. Knowledge isn't possessed or lacking, but accumulates in layers of understanding. The spectrum principle doesn't imply that all positions are equally valid or that distinctions lack meaning. Some places on a spectrum may indeed be preferable to others, depending on context and values. The point isn't relativism, but recognition of continuity and complexity. As you move through the world today, notice where you impose binary thinking. Where might gradations exist? Where might complementary truths replace competing absolutes? Where might both and replace either or? In embracing the spectrum, we trade false certainty for authentic understanding. Fast, 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 rush, rush, rush. Productivity, efficiency, effectiveness, acceleration, progress, evolution, adaptability. These are our modern afflictions, hurrying towards solutions that require time to unfold. We live in an age of immediacy. We can communicate instantly. We get overnight shipping. We have access to on-demand entertainment. And we are all looking for quick fixes. Our technological capabilities and advancements have accelerated many processes, creating the illusion that all outcomes can and should arrive immediately. We have developed speed but forgotten timing. Ironically enough, the ancient farmers knew better. They understood the natural rhythms of growth. They knew very well that no amount of frantic activity could force a seed to become a tree overnight. It needs time to develop, sometimes tens of years. Each development has its necessary duration, its organic unfolding that cannot be artificially accelerated without consequence. Time is not a negotiable in ripening. As a Chinese proverb wisely notes, one moment of patience may ward off great disaster. One moment of impatience may ruin a whole life. Have you ever stopped to think how many problems we actually exacerbate through premature action? The relationship conflict where hasty words create deeper wounds. The creative challenge where forced production leads to mediocre results no one is interested in. The emotional turmoil where immediate distraction prevents necessary processing. The investment opportunity that was abandoned just before it would have flourished into wealth for a lifetime. History offers countless examples. The Manhattan Project physicist Richard Feynman discovered a profound mathematical insight only after setting aside the problem for months. Lincoln waited for the right political moment to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, understanding that timing would determine its effectiveness. Darwin developed his evolutionary theory over decades of careful observation and reflection. Goethe's Faust took nearly 60 years to complete, the masterpiece evolving through various drafts as the author's philosophy matured, demonstrating how great works often require a lifetime of contemplation. Marcus Aurelius displayed remarkable patience not only in composing his meditations during military campaigns, but also in governing the Roman Empire, famously tolerating criticism, hearing petitioners for hours without interruption, and responding to provincial revolts with measured restraint instead of impulsive vengeance. Pythagoras also required his disciples to observe a 5-year period of silence before fully entering his brotherhood, believing that true wisdom emerged only after extended periods of listening and contemplation. The mathematical insights he's known for being fruits of this deliberately unhurried approach to knowledge. As Blaise Pascal once said, all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. The Japanese concept of ma recognizes the productive power of intervals, the space between notes that makes music, the pauses in conversation that allow meaning to land, the fallow periods that restore fertility. This wisdom understands that creation and resolution often happen in the spaces between active effort. Inspiration often comes to those willing to rest, even if they write every single day. Does this mean we should always wait and never act? Absolutely not. This principle doesn't advocate for passivity, but discernment, knowing when to move and when to be still, when to push and when to allow. The sage doesn't wait when immediate action is required, but neither do they force outcomes that need time to develop naturally. Lao Tzu was right when he said, "When the student is ready, the teacher will appear." The best teachers in the world can't teach you anything if you don't take the time to do the inner work. Psychological healing works similarly. The bereaved person cannot rush through grief. The traumatized individual needs time to rebuild safety. Likewise, the addict needs sustained practice to rewire neural pathways. These processes have their own timing that must be respected. As Jung observed, somewhere right at the bottom of one's own being, one generally does know where one should go and what one should do. But there are times when the clown we call I behaves in such a distracting fashion that the inner voice cannot make its presence felt. Thus, we need a different perspective to truly see ourselves, and psychological healing requires patience and self-awareness. We need to quiet the conscious ego, the clown we call I, to hear the deeper wisdom within. Even in contexts where urgency seems paramount, patience often produces better results. Emergency physicians know that sometimes the best approach is watchful waiting. Military strategists understand how premature action can reveal advantages to opponents. Negotiators recognize how silence creates space for concessions. Pilots always remember to check every box on their checklists. Lao Tzu expressed this paradoxical efficiency. Nature does not hurry, yet everything is accomplished. The technological paradigm treats time as the enemy, or as something to minimize or eliminate. But the wisdom traditions see time as an ally, a necessary dimension for natural development. The oak tree needs decades to reach maturity. The relationship needs years to develop depth. The skill needs thousands of hours to approach mastery. What makes patience so challenging? Our neurological wiring favors immediate rewards over delayed gratification, unfortunately. Our economic systems prioritize quarterly profits over long-term sustainability. Our social media apps reward rapid response over thoughtful consideration. On the other side, patience requires swimming against powerful currents. Yet the capacity to endure a necessary duration may be our most valuable resource. The parent who tolerates a child's developmental pace rather than forcing premature achievement often wins both a son or a daughter and a friend. The healer who gives treatments time to work rather than constantly changing approaches will help his patients to be stable. The leader who sustains vision through inevitable setbacks rather than abandoning long-term strategy will earn the respect of his people and create a better life for everyone. Patience transforms waiting from passive endurance to active presence. So, remain fully engaged with the process and stop being fixated on a certain outcome. Patience means receptivity. Patience is a strategic restraint. Never forget to notice the problems solving themselves while you sleep, the ideas arriving during a shower, the relationship healing through sustained and reciprocal presence, the opportunity emerging after persistent preparation. These are your superpowers, your natural timing, the necessary intervals between planting, harvesting, questioning, answering, being wounded and being healed. When you face your demons, ask yourself, what is the natural time frame for this process? Am I forcing what needs to unfold? Am I forcing a seed to grow into a tree too soon? What might become possible if I just patiently paid attention? The most elegant solutions often emerge not from frantic effort, but from aligned timing. Be ready when the moment ripens. The unsexy truth about excellence, small actions repeated endlessly, yield extraordinary results. We worship at the altar of talent, genius, and inspiration. We celebrate the prodigy, the natural, the overnight success. Our stories feature dramatic moments of breakthrough and revelation. Yet this narrative obscures the actual mechanism of mastery, which is none other than the humble power of consistency. The virtuoso musician who captivates audiences has played scales for thousands of hours. The author, whose prose seems effortless, has written daily for decades. The athlete who performs impossible feats has practiced fundamental movements countless times. Behind every moment of brilliance is a mountain of repetition. As Aristotle recognized in his Nicomachean Ethics, virtues are formed in man by his doing the actions. Consider the mathematics of consistency. Improving just 1% daily compounds to a 37-fold improvement annually. Small advantages accumulated consistently create exponential separation over time. The modest daily practice sustained over the years produces results that appear miraculous to those who never witnessed the process. The Japanese concept of kaizen, which means continuous incremental improvement, transformed their manufacturing industry after World War II. Rather than seeking dramatic innovations, Japanese manufacturing companies, with Toyota being the most prominent example, but including numerous other Japanese manufacturers who adopted the Kaizen philosophy, such as Honda, Suzuki, and Nissan, focused on countless small refinements that collectively created unprecedented quality and efficiency. Fortunately, you don't have to be a manufacturing company, because this principle applies equally to personal development. Neuroscience confirms this wisdom. When we repeat actions, neural pathways strengthen through myelination, or the biological basis of skill development. The brain physically reconstructs itself around consistent behaviors. What requires conscious effort initially becomes automatic and effortless through repetition. That's why you need to feed your brain with healthy consistency and eliminate repeating the same harmful habits and patterns of thinking and acting. The monks of various traditions understand this through their dedication to daily practice. Whether chanting, meditating, or copying texts, they recognize that transformation occurs not through intensity, but through regularity. The spiritual insight follows the consistent practice rather than preceding it. Why do you think I'm creating so many videos? I'm patiently but consistently getting better at a craft I love dearly and believe to be a gateway to a better world through a fragment of its inhabitants. Do I expect to change the world today? No. But what about 10, 20, or 50 years from now? What about when I die? What if we all thought the same way? As the Zen proverb states, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. Have you chopped your woods and carried your waters today? If not, what are you waiting for? Start doing it. Continue your path. Of course, it is easier said than done, but no great transformation occurs without an equally great amount of effort and struggle. What makes consistency so challenging? Our minds crave novelty and variation. Our bodies resist discomfort. Our culture celebrates the dramatic over the incremental. Our brains prioritize immediate rewards over delayed gratification. Consistency requires swimming against these powerful currents. Yet consistency contains paradoxical freedom. When daily practice becomes non-negotiable, like brushing teeth or sleeping properly, or eating the food that truly nourishes us, it no longer requires decision-making energy. The question shifts from "will I practice today?" to "when will I practice today?" to doing it without even thinking about it. The elimination of choice reduces or even eliminates psychological friction. The writer doesn't only wait for inspiration, but writes regularly, knowing that inspiration emerges through engagement and experience combined with time to incubate the wisdom he acquired during these processes. The meditator doesn't wait for mental clarity, but sits regularly, knowing that clarity develops through practice. The athlete doesn't wait for perfect conditions, but trains regularly, knowing that adaptation occurs through consistent stimulus, determination, and effort. Consider how mastery develops across domains. Language acquisition requires daily exposure and practice. Relationship building requires regular attention and communication. Physical transformation requires consistent nutrition and movement. Financial wealth requires regular investment and discipline. None of these outcomes can be achieved through occasional heroic effort. All require the unsexy persistence of consistent practice. Thus, we explored another principle that offers both encouragement and a challenge. The encouragement? Mastery is available to anyone willing to commit to regular practice over time. The challenge? There are no shortcuts or substitutes for this fundamental process. As the martial arts master Bruce Lee observed, "I fear not the man who has practiced 10,000 kicks once, but I fear the man who has practiced one kick 10,000 times." Consistency reveals another counterintuitive truth. Innovation emerges from mastery rather than replacing it. The jazz musician who improvises brilliantly first internalizes scales and standards. The chef who creates novel dishes first mastered fundamental techniques. The writer who develops a unique style first absorbed traditional forms. Consistency, however, doesn't mean mindless repetition. Effective practice includes reflection, adjustment, and progressive challenge. But even these refinements must be consistently applied to produce transformation. As you consider your aspirations and setbacks, ask yourself, what daily practice would move me toward mastery? What systems could support my consistency? What expectations about timing might I need to adjust? The path to extraordinary results isn't mysterious. It is the ordinary action performed with extraordinary consistency. Before any of our actions, there's a thought. Before an achievement, there's a vision. Before a relationship, there's perception. The primacy of mind creates reality in ways both obvious and subtle. Before anything exists in the material world, it exists first as a concept, as imagination, as an internal representation, as an ineffable reality. All buildings, institutions, innovations, technologies, works of art, and love stories begin as mental constructs before taking physical form. And the Hermetic principle, the all is mind, the universe is mental, points exactly to this fundamental truth. While interpretations vary across traditions, the core recognition remains the same. Consciousness creates experience through perception, interpretation, and response. As Marcus Aurelius observed, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. Consider how perception shapes experience. Two people encounter identical circumstances, yet experience them entirely differently based on their interpretations. The optimist and pessimist, the grateful and entitled, the curious and judgmental, create distinct realities through the lens of their mental orientation. Modern psychology confirms this ancient wisdom. Cognitive therapy demonstrates how changing thought patterns transforms emotional experience. Neuroplasticity research shows how mental practices physically rewire brain structure. Placebo studies reveal how belief influences physiological processes. The mind-body connection operates continuously and endlessly. The quantum physicist Max Planck concluded after a lifetime of study, "I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. Everything that we talk about, everything that we regard as existing, postulates consciousness. However, please note that this principle doesn't imply simplistic positive thinking or deny material constraints. Wishing doesn't make things so. You need to do more than that. You need both perception and action, as Marcus Aurelius taught us. Yet, between magical thinking and materialist reductionism lies a more nuanced way of life, where mind and matter exist in a dynamic interconnection, each influencing the other through complex feedback loops. And your integration requires you to have a foot in both worlds. The principle appears in various traditions. The Buddhist Dhammapada captures it brilliantly. We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts we make the world. Speak or act with an impure mind, and trouble will follow you as the wheel follows the ox that draws the cart. The Christian scripture also states, "As a man thinks in his heart, so is he." Now consider these manifestations of mental primacy. Expectation shapes perception, as we tend to notice what confirms our existing beliefs. Attention determines experience, as what we focus on expands in our awareness. Interpretation creates meaning, as events have no inherent significance until we assign it. Visualization influences performance, as mental rehearsal activates similar neural pathways as physical practice. Belief affects physiology, as our convictions shape hormonal and immune responses. The implication isn't that external reality doesn't exist, or that all limitations are imaginary. Rather, it means that our relationship with reality, how we perceive, interpret, and respond to it, primarily determines our experience. Two people in identical external circumstances can have radically different subjective experiences, maybe even polar opposites, based on their mental approach. One may see the world as a curse or hell, while the other may see it as a miracle or heaven. Thus, when you cultivate awareness of your mental patterns, your habitual perceptions, your interpretations, and your responses, you gain choice where before there was only automatic reaction. The gap between stimulus and response widens, and a space for conscious selection develops within you. As Viktor Frankl discovered in concentration camps, everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Our mental models, our assumptions, our beliefs, and our frameworks filter all experience. When unexamined, they operate invisibly, creating the illusion that we perceive reality directly, when, in fact, we are looking only at what our minds interpret. When brought to awareness, however, they become tools rather than constraints, available for revision and refinement. Consider the mind as both a receptor and a projector. It receives sensory information and simultaneously projects meaning onto that information. The projection occurs so rapidly and automatically that we mistake our interpretations for direct perception. Recognizing this process creates the possibility of choice in projection. How to apply this principle in your life? A splendid question for such an abstract concept. You apply this by understanding how your interpretations create reactions in the people you want around you. You apply this by understanding how your mental models either limit or expand possibilities in your creative endeavors. You apply it by perceiving how vision precedes and enables manifestation, as any respectable leader has a vision. In health, we apply it by acknowledging how belief influences biological processes. You will be surprised to find out that many physical illnesses can be prevented with the right continuous state of mind. In personal development, self-concept refers to the collection of beliefs and perceptions you hold about yourself, including your abilities, limitations, personality traits, and potential. Thus, how you view yourself, your self-concept, directly impacts what you believe is possible for you to achieve, your potential. For instance, if someone believes they're not a math person, this self-concept may prevent them from even attempting to improve their mathematical abilities. If someone sees themselves as resilient, they're more likely to persist through challenges. If someone identifies as creative, they'll be more likely to explore and develop their artistic capabilities. Our internal beliefs about ourselves often become self-fulfilling prophecies. By becoming aware of how our self-concept might be limiting us, we can work to reshape these beliefs, thereby expanding our potential and possibilities for growth. This doesn't mean ignoring external conditions or material limitations. The sage acknowledges reality while recognizing that the perception of that reality remains partially constructed. A clear-eyed recognition of both constraint and possibility. As you live your life day by day, try to notice, where do your automatic interpretations inflict unnecessary suffering? How might different ways of thinking transform the same situation? What mental models limit your perception of possibility? And what mental models can truly elevate your life to higher levels? How does your attention influence or create what appears most real and significant? When you are aware of the mental dimension of experience, you discover that many prisons exist primarily in thought and can be transformed through the same medium. Rulers don't want you to know, but we are fragments of divinity. We walk the earth, forgetting our origin, yet we carry the spark. This final principle may appear grandiose, even blasphemous from certain perspectives. Yet, across all wisdom traditions, it appears as a consistent recognition that human consciousness is part of the divine nature, that we are not only physical beings having occasional spiritual experiences, but spiritual beings having temporary physical experiences. We are all manifestations of the same supreme oneness. Thus, we are all gods. The Vedantic tradition declares Aham Brahmasmi, which means I am Brahman, the ultimate reality. The mystical Christian recognizes that the kingdom of God is within you. The Hermetic tradition states, as above, so below, the human microcosm reflects the divine macrocosm. However, keep in mind that I am not trying to inflate your ego. That's the opposite of my intention. What I intend is to remind you of your essential nature and help you recognize it from now on. Spinoza, the brilliant lens grinder and philosopher, perceived all existence as expressions of a single divine substance. In his view, we are not separate from divinity, but particular manifestations of it, or modes of the infinite, expressing through finite form. Not God in the anthropomorphic sense, but in essence and substance. Consider the implications of this perspective. If we are manifestations of the divine, our creative capacity reflects this origin. Through consciousness, will, and action, we participate in creating reality. Our thoughts, words, and deeds help create it. We are not passive observers, but active participants in the unfolding cosmos. As Alan Watts beautifully expressed, to know that you are God is another way of saying that you feel completely one with this universe. This principle also doesn't justify narcissistic entitlement. Quite the opposite, it places a great responsibility on each consciousness. If our thoughts and actions participate in creating reality, both personally and collectively, we bear cosmic responsibility for their quality and direction. As divine capacity, requires divine awareness. Think about what happens when we forget this principle. We perceive ourselves as isolated fragments in a mechanical universe, mere products of chance and necessity, disconnected from source and purpose, resentful, envious, closed, unripened, running after the wrong keys. This amnesia creates an existential alienation and a spiritual homesickness that characterizes much of the modern suffering we feel. But the mystic minds offer processes for remembering divine nature. Meditation reveals the witness consciousness beyond personality. Contemplative prayer opens communion with the divine. Entheogenic ceremonies dissolve boundaries between self and cosmos. Looking at the ocean silently and admiring how wonderful it is to be able to be one with it here on earth, and this reality. These are all great ways to remove the veils that obscure that precious essential nature. When we first understand and feel this reality, even momentarily, our minds change forever. Personal concerns don't disappear, but recontextualize within larger awareness. The dramas that consumed us reveal themselves as particular plays on a cosmic stage, which are significant yet not ultimate. The boundaries that seem so solid become permeable. The separations more apparent than real. The diversity more united than we initially were capable of seeing. This principle raises several ethical questions. If all beings share divine essence, how might we treat them differently? If consciousness itself is sacred, how might we engage our thoughts with greater reverence? If we participate in creating reality, what responsibility do we bear for its quality? This principle reframes human limitation. We remain finite expressions of the infinite, temporal manifestations of the eternal, conditioned vehicles of the unconditioned. The constraints of embodied existence remain while simultaneously participating in transcendent awareness. That's why we are gods, all of us. Carl Jung recognized this paradox in psychological terms. Individuation involves both differentiation of a unique personality and recognition of connection to the collective unconscious. We become most distinctly ourselves precisely as we recognize participation in something greater than personal identity. Quantum physicist Erwin Schrödinger concluded with an incredible statement: the total number of minds in the universe is one. This principle invites both contemplation and expression. We access divinity through stillness that reveals an essential awareness. We manifest divinity through creativity that expresses purpose. Neither alone is sufficient. Both receptivity and activity participate in God's plan. Ask yourself, what does it mean for you to possess a consciousness that is divine in nature? How does your creative capacity reflect cosmic creativity? What responsibility accompanies the power to shape reality through perception and action? What veils obscure recognition of your essential nature? Never forget that the recognition of your divine nature doesn't separate you from your humanity. Quite the contrary, it connects you more deeply to it. Human life suddenly becomes sacred in all of its forms when we realize that the same essence expresses through infinite forms. The divine is playing hide and seek with itself through the cosmic game of manifestation. When you think about it, we are not separate entities seeking God. We are God seeking ourselves. We've journeyed together through 12 principles that form the bedrock of a life worth living, 12 principles that demand embodiment, 12 immediate realities that await recognition, from controlling what we can control to recognizing our divine nature, from integrating opposites to embracing patience. Each principle forms part of a constellation that, when viewed as a whole, maps the territory of our potential. Each reveals an aspect of reality that, once seen, cannot be unseen. These principles aren't mine to give or yours to take. They belong to no one and everyone. They've been articulated by sages across millennia, rediscovered by seekers in every generation, and embodied by those who understand that true wisdom isn't theoretical but practical. From Epictetus to Einstein, from Lao Tzu to Jung, from Buddha to Spinoza, the greatest minds converge on these fundamental patterns because truth recognizes itself. What makes these principles so powerful and so dangerous to conventional thinking is that they can't be compartmentalized. Each implies all the others. Each contains within it the seed of total transformation. You cannot truly apply just one without eventually encountering all of them, because reality is a unified field, not a fragmented collection. And of course, there are countless other principles you can now, hopefully, discover and implement with more ease. The question now is what you'll do with them. Knowledge without application remains sterile. Understanding without embodiment becomes another form of spiritual entertainment. The principles we've explored are living presences that inform every decision, every relationship, every moment of your existence, so put them into practice. I invite you to sit with these principles, metabolize them, do not quote them, but become them. The philosopher Heraclitus said that character is destiny. Similarly, these principles we explored, when integrated, don't just change your character but transform your destiny. This is why I create these explorations, not to add to the noise of information, but to create silence in which wisdom can be heard. Not to give you more, but to reveal what you already possess. Not to elevate myself, but to remind you of your height. If these revelations resonate with the truth you already know but may have forgotten, that is no coincidence. Truth recognizes itself across time and space. I should also point out that these principles are not about achieving perfection, but embracing wholeness. They don't promise the absence of suffering, but the transformation of it. They don't offer escape from reality, but deeper immersion in it. They don't separate you from the world, but connect you more profoundly to it. You should now sense a larger feeling of freedom. In a world fragmenting into specialized disciplines and isolated identities, these principles offer integration. In a culture obsessed with novelty, they offer timelessness. In a society driven by external validation, they reveal the sovereign power that has always resided within you. The ancient Hermetic axiom states, "As above, so below, as within, so without." The principles we've explored operate at every scale of existence, from quantum fields to cosmic expansion, from neural networks to social systems, from individual psyches to collective consciousness. As a consequence, if you embody them in your life, you participate in the harmonization of all levels of reality. This is our destiny, but most of us don't know it yet. This is the great work that transforms base metals into gold, fragmentation into wholeness, unconsciousness into awareness. This is what you were born for. This is what awaits you when you awaken to the principles that have always guided those with eyes to see and hearts to understand. Until our paths cross again on the next exploration, may these principles illuminate your path as they have illuminated the paths of countless seekers before you, including myself. May they reveal to you the extraordinary being I know you've always been, waiting patiently to be recognized.